Velarix stood in the long, echoing hall of the orbital station, her scaled wings folded tightly against her back. The cold metal walls hummed with the energy of moving cargo, the chatter of alien voices, and the distant clank of machinery. She held a small, worn work token in her claw, staring at the sliding payment door that seemed to mock her every day. Her heart ached, not for herself, but for her children. They had gone without food for 2 days, and she could almost feel their tiny claws scratching at empty bowls. "Please? I only need my wages," she whispered, her voice low, almost lost in the noise. "My children haven't eaten." No one stopped. The officials at the payment chamber were busy, uninterested, their eyes flicking over her like she was air. Merchants walked past with their carts and data tablets, some sneering, some pretending not to notice. She had learned long ago that asking for help rarely worked. The galaxy had rules, and rules didn't care about dragon mothers or hungry hatchlings. Velarix clenched the token tighter. It was old, scratched, and nearly worn down, but it was proof of her work. For 2 long cycles, she had labored in the station's cargo bays, lifting heavy containers, checking energy cores, and repairing conveyor belts, all for the promise of payment that came slowly and unpredictably. The officials claimed it was standard procedure. They called it efficiency. She called it survival. Somewhere above, a human officer walked through the hall. Aaron Hale had only recently been assigned to this station, and most of the alien laborers ignored him. He had learned quickly how to navigate the system, follow the orders, avoid trouble, keep your hands clean. But something about Velarix's voice made him pause. He watched her claws tremble around the token, her eyes bright but weary, her chest heaving as if she had carried more than just cargo all day. No human was meant to care about dragon workers here. Not officially. Not according to the regulations, the reports, the endless lists of protocols that Aaron had memorized in training. But still, he felt a tight knot in his stomach. Something was wrong. Something very wrong. Velarix turned her gaze toward the payment chamber again, hoping for a flicker of recognition. The door slid open with a hiss, and a small alien clerk peeked out. "Next," the clerk said, not meeting her eyes. She stepped forward, her scales brushing the cool metal floor. "I am Velarix," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have completed my work for this cycle. My token is here. Please, my children." "Name and token number," the clerk interrupted, already tapping at a data pad. His fingers were quick, but his eyes were still empty. He did not look at her, did not ask how her children were. He simply processed her data. Velarix's tail twitched nervously. She lowered her head, trying not to show the panic rising in her chest. The station was loud, but in that moment, it felt unbearably quiet. Her children were waiting in the lower habitat ring. Small, hungry, innocent. She could almost hear their tiny voices calling for her in her mind, whispering from the darkness. Aaron moved closer, not wanting to be noticed. He was careful, keeping behind a stack of crates. He watched as the clerk scanned her token, then paused, frowning at a screen. The token was valid. Everything seemed to be in order. But instead of receiving payment, a small message appeared: "Payment delayed. Standard processing cycle applies." Velarix's claws clenched harder. She forced herself to breathe. 2 days, my hatchlings haven't eaten for 2 days, she muttered, almost to herself. "Please?" The clerk shrugged and turned away, moving to call the next worker forward. No one else stopped. No one offered help. No one even asked if she needed it. Aaron's jaw tightened. He had seen injustice before, yes. But he had never seen it this stark, this personal. Velarix was not just a worker. She was a mother. And in this hall of machinery and rules, her children were nothing but numbers on a distant screen. Velarix knelt briefly, lowering her head in despair. Her wings brushed the floor, a small, sad gesture that no one noticed. She whispered again, quieter this time, "I only need my wages, please." Aaron made a decision, quietly and firmly. He would not speak yet. He would not act openly. But he would watch. He would learn. He would find a way to make the system work for her, even if the system was not designed to care. The dragon stepped away from the payment chamber, dragging herself through the hall. Other workers barely glanced at her, moving with the same weary expressions, all trapped in the same endless cycle. Some were stronger, some were older, some had already given up entirely. Velarix had not. Her exhaustion did not stop her courage. Her worry for her children outweighed her own pain. Aaron followed at a distance, careful to avoid attention. He watched how she moved, how she carried the weight of labor without complaint, how her eyes darted constantly toward the lower habitat ring where her children waited. She was not asking for luxury. She was asking for survival. The hall stretched on endlessly, a maze of metal corridors, cargo lifts, and flickering lights. Velarix paused at the edge of a balcony overlooking the lower levels. Tiny shapes moved below, her hatchlings. They were small, weak, and quiet, huddled together for warmth. One raised its tiny head, almost sensing her presence, and then lowered it again. Velarix's heart ached. She had promised them food. She had promised herself she would not fail them. But today, the promise felt impossible. Eren clenched his fists behind his back. He did not know what he could do yet. But he knew this, he could not ignore it. No human could, not if they truly saw her, truly saw the children, truly saw what survival meant. Velarix turned away from the balcony and started back toward her quarters. Her claws scraped softly against the metal, her tail dragging tiredly. The hum of the station, the chatter of other workers, the clanking of machinery, all of it felt heavier now. And somewhere deep inside, Eren felt the weight of a choice forming. One choice that could change everything. He would not let her plea go unheard. Eren watched Velarix move through the hallways of the station, her heavy claws echoing against the metal floor. She seemed smaller now, not because she was physically small, dragons rarely were, but because the system around her made everything heavy and cold. Every corridor, every lift, every official's glance reminded her that she was alone. Not because the galaxy hated her, but because it had built a system that rewarded silence. The station's labor rules were clear. Workers submitted tokens after each cycle. Officials checked the tokens. Payments were processed according to standard schedules. Any delays were considered normal. Any complaint could be logged, but it rarely mattered. The rules made it legal to starve a worker for days, as long as paperwork was correct. Morality was optional. Survival was optional. Eren realized this system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. He followed Velarix quietly, keeping to the shadows of the cargo bays. The humans on the station usually ignored dragon workers, preferring to deal with numbers on screens, logistics on tablets, and orders from higher officers. Eren had done the same for weeks, keeping himself invisible. But now, something changed. Watching Velarix reminded him that rules did not equal justice. Velarix stopped at a storage lift and leaned against the metal railing. She took a deep breath, the kind that felt like it could break her ribs. She stared at the lower levels where her hatchlings waited. The small creatures huddled in the shadows, their thin tails wrapped around each other for warmth. 2 days without food had not killed them, but it had drained their energy. She knew if she could get her wages today, she could buy at least enough rations to last a few cycles. Eren remembered his training: never get involved, never change the system. And yet, as he watched her, he felt a fire he had not known existed. He started asking small questions quietly, checking terminals and logs that most officers ignored. He studied the payment cycles, the token processing times, the ways the system deliberately delayed wages. Everything matched the rules. Nothing was illegal. And yet, dragons suffered. Children went hungry. Mothers feared failure. He found a small anomaly: emergency relief clauses. Humans had designed them for rare situations: natural disasters, accidents, unexpected shortages. In theory, the clauses allowed instant transfer of resources to prevent loss of life. The station never used them for normal delays. Officials said that normal delays were not emergencies. But Eren realized that for Velarix and her children, this was exactly an emergency. Meanwhile, Velarix returned to her work. She moved containers, inspected energy conduits, and repaired damaged circuits. Her movements were careful, practiced, precise. Even exhaustion could not stop her efficiency. Other dragon workers glanced at her with silent respect. Some had given up asking for help. Some had learned to hide hunger in their eyes. But she continued. She did not complain. She did not falter. She survived not for herself, but for her children. Eren followed her from a distance, taking notes, studying terminals, planning. Every time she paused to breathe, he felt the weight of the injustice more heavily. He watched how the system treated her as invisible, how officials ignored her pleas, how no one spoke up. He understood why the galaxy believed humans were unusual. Humans were supposed to follow rules. Humans were supposed to stay neutral. But he was not neutral anymore. The day wore on. Velarix worked until her claws ached, until her wings ached, until her mind felt too heavy to carry on. The token she had submitted in the morning had still not been processed. She whispered again to herself, "I only need my wages, my children need food." Aaron studied the emergency clause. He had to be careful. He could not trigger alarms. He could not act in a way that looked like favoritism. He had to find a loophole, something legal, something clean. He knew station authorities would resist. They would say he was bending rules unnecessarily. They would try to stop him. But he also knew that nothing would happen if he stayed silent. Velarix finally returned to her quarters. She lowered her head, rubbing tired claws together. She whispered to herself about her hatchlings, about how every cycle felt like a battle she might lose. She could hear their small voices in her mind, pleading, and she forced herself not to cry. Dragons did not cry in public. Mothers did not falter in front of machines. Survival required pride, even when empty. Aaron followed her to a nearby control panel, careful to keep his actions invisible. He accessed the payment system quietly, checking the logs, noting where delays had been repeated for other dragon workers. The system was efficient in its own way. It moved resources around in a way that made sense on a screen. But it ignored life. It ignored hunger. And Aaron realized that sometimes efficiency was cruelty in disguise. He thought of the humans back on Earth, of stories his ancestors told about fairness, about helping when it was not convenient, about acting even when no law demanded it. The stories felt alive in him now, giving him courage. He could bend the system. He could use the emergency clause. He could make a difference without breaking rules, without causing a scene. The corridor lights flickered, and Velarix paused. She looked up, sensing movement, but saw only Aaron's shadow from the crates. She turned away, continuing toward her small quarters. Her movements were steady, but her eyes were tired. She had learned long ago that hope was fragile. A mistake could shatter it. Aaron's mind worked fast. He would have to act soon. The system would not change itself. It would not care. If he delayed, the children would go hungry another day. And every day without food made survival harder, made life feel unfair, made hope shrink smaller. He made his choice quietly, determinedly. He would use the rules to help her. He would not need to fight the system openly. He would not need to risk his career unnecessarily. But he would act. Velarix entered her quarters and looked at the small sleeping forms of her hatchlings. They stirred, weak and hungry. She whispered a soft apology, feeling helpless. She had done all she could. She had worked all she could. And yet, the system had not moved fast enough. Aaron watched from the shadows. He did not step forward yet. Not today. Not until he had a plan. But he promised himself that by tomorrow, her children would eat. By tomorrow, the system would bend in a small way. By tomorrow, a human would refuse to let silence harm those who could not defend themselves. And in that quiet decision, a small fire of change was born. Aaron spent the night thinking. He could not sleep, not with Velarix's words echoing in his mind, not with the image of her small hatchlings curled up in hunger. The station was quiet in the dark hours, the hum of machinery soft, almost gentle. But Aaron felt a storm inside him. He had rules. He had orders. He had always followed them. Yet now, he realized that following rules would not feed hungry children. Following orders would not save a mother from despair. By the first light cycle, he had made his decision. He would act. Carefully, quietly, without drawing attention. The human emergency clause was rarely used, and it was meant for situations where lives were at risk. Velarix's children were at risk. He did not need to ask permission. He only needed to move. Velarix had returned to her quarters before sunrise. She had cleaned the small space, arranged the bedding for her hatchlings, and quietly whispered apologies to them. She had done everything she could. Her wings were heavy. Her claws were sore. Her mind was tired. But she had not given up. Even exhaustion did not break her. She looked at the sleeping forms of her children and brushed her claw over each of them. Their breathing was weak, but steady. That was all she could ask for now. Aaron approached the terminal from a hidden console. He accessed the payment logs and carefully triggered the emergency clause. The system blinked and hesitated. Alerts popped in the corner of his screen, warning him that the procedure was unusual. But he ignored the warnings. He entered Velarix's token number, the correct account codes, and initiated the immediate credit transfer. Minutes later, the confirmation flashed green, payment processed. Aaron exhaled slowly. He knew this could cause problems later. Officials might question it. Station administrators might complain. Rules might be cited. But in that moment, he felt relief. Velarix would have food for her children. The system would bend, even if slightly, because a human refused to walk away. The dragon mother did not know what had happened yet. She rose from her quarters to collect rations from the supply pods. When the hatchlings woke, weak and hungry, she approached with fear in her eyes, unsure if there would be enough. She pressed her claw against the dispenser and watched as rations slid out, perfectly measured and warm. She froze. For a moment, she could not understand. "How?" she whispered. She looked around. No one was there. The hallway was empty. Then a soft voice came from the shadows. "I couldn't let them go hungry," Aaron said. He stepped into the light slowly, hands raised to show no threat. "I did what the system allows. It's legal. It's right." Velarix's eyes widened. She stared at the human, at the man who had broken no law but had done everything to help. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would a human care?" Aaron shrugged. "Because someone should. Because it matters. Because it is the right thing to do." The hatchlings stirred, sensing their mother's relief. Their tiny heads lifted, their eyes blinking at the sudden food. Velarix knelt, gathering them in her wings. She whispered thanks, softly, almost not believing it. She had never seen a human act like this before, not without expectation, not for reward, not for gain. Aaron smiled faintly. He did not answer her question. He did not need to. The moment itself spoke louder than words. A human had acted. A mother had food for her children. That was enough. The other workers began to notice. Dragons peeked around corners, whispering quietly to each other. They had always known hunger and delay, but they had never seen it corrected so quickly. Whispers grew. Curiosity spread. Slowly, cautiously, hope began to bloom. Velarix watched her hatchlings eat, her heart easing. She looked at Aaron again. She could see the kindness in his face, the quiet determination that had brought her here. She did not know his name, but she would remember him forever. One human, standing against the cold system, had made her family safe today. The station authorities began to notice the change too. Officials looked at the logs, surprised at the sudden emergency payment. Questions were asked. Protocols were reviewed. Some humans and aliens frowned, worried about precedent. But no one could deny that the children were fed. No one could argue that survival had been achieved. Velarix stepped forward, not boldly, but with quiet dignity. She explained, softly, that her children had gone hungry. She did not accuse anyone. She did not demand blame. She simply stated the truth. The words carried weight because they were real. They were life. They were hope made visible. Aaron did not speak for her. He let her words stand alone. He understood that this was her moment, not his. His role had been simple, act where the system failed. And now, her voice, steady and proud despite exhaustion, carried the message further than any report or protocol could. The day continued. Velarix's children ate, grew stronger, and began to move more freely. She tended them carefully, watching over them, her wings protective, her tail curled around them like a shield. And Aaron continued his work quietly in the background, monitoring the station, ensuring nothing went wrong, making sure no one could undo what had been done. By the end of the cycle, the corridor was no longer just a place of cold metal and rules. It had warmth. It had life. It had proof that small acts could ripple outward, changing more than one family, more than one worker. Velarix turned to Aaron once more, her eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "I do not understand your ways," she said softly. "But I will never forget what you have done. My children, they are safe because of you." Aaron nodded, quietly. "That is all that matters," he said. "Keep them safe. I only helped in the way I could. The rest is yours." And in that moment, something shifted. The station, the cold rules, the silence that had long been ignored, all of it seemed a little less powerful. A human had acted. A dragon mother had hope. And the smallest, quietest voices, her children, had reason to live. For the first time, Velarix allowed herself to believe that survival was possible. Not because the rules changed, not because anyone else cared, but because one human had refused to walk away. And that refusal would echo farther than anyone could imagine. By the next cycle, word had spread quietly through the station. Dragon workers whispered about Velarix and her hatchlings, about the human who had helped her when no one else would. Some were cautious, some were hopeful, but all were curious. The officials noticed the stir and frowned. Nothing illegal had happened, but the emergency payment had created a ripple in the carefully ordered system. Aaron knew it would not be simple. Rules were meant to control, and anyone who bent them, even for good, could be seen as a threat. He monitored the terminals, watching for alerts and reports, knowing that station authorities would question any unusual activity. But he also knew that turning away now would undo everything. He had to stand firm, quietly but decisively. Velarix continued her work, moving with the same quiet determination she always had. Her hatchlings were fed and warm now, but she worried constantly. The adults around her had always survived by hiding weakness, by never asking for help. Now, her small family had been given a chance, and she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief for the food, fear of what might come next. Aaron found himself watching her more closely. Not because he doubted her, but because he understood that the system was watching too. Every step she took, every action she made, would now be scrutinized. Other dragons began to observe her as well, noticing that she no longer hid her struggle. They whispered quietly among themselves, wondering if it might be safe to hope. The station authorities called Aaron in for questioning. They did not accuse him openly, but their eyes were sharp, their voices polite but tense. "Why did you authorize this payment?" one officer asked, tapping the console. "It was unusual. It bypassed standard procedure. Explain yourself." Aaron met the officer's gaze calmly. "It was allowed under the emergency clause," he said. "Her children's survival was at risk. Nothing illegal occurred. The system is working as it was designed to." The officer frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "This sets a precedent. Others may demand similar actions. The system could be undermined." Aaron nodded. "Perhaps. But the system only works if it serves life, not just procedure. We cannot ignore those in need because of fear." The officer left without further comment, but Aaron knew that quiet resistance would continue. Other humans might be warned to follow rules strictly, and some might hesitate. But one small act of kindness had already changed lives. Velarix sensed the tension too. Some dragons glanced at her as she moved through the corridors, their eyes wary but respectful. She did not understand everything that was happening, but she felt the change. Even the other workers, who had spent years hiding struggle, began to ask questions, to notice delays, to wonder if someone might finally act. Her hatchlings thrived. Each day, they grew stronger, learning to explore small areas of the quarters, to flap tiny wings, to test their strength. Velarix watched them with cautious pride, feeling a warmth she had not allowed herself in a long time. She did not know if their safety would last, but for now, she could breathe. Aaron continued his quiet watch. He tracked payments, monitoring the system for failures, making small corrections when needed. He did not intervene beyond what was necessary, but he ensured that Velarix and other workers like her would not be ignored again. The station's administration could resist, complain, or even threaten, but he knew the truth. Kindness, even in a small form, was stronger than bureaucracy. Rumors spread. Dragons began to talk about fairness, about hope, about what it meant to survive with someone watching for them. Officials tried to suppress the talk, reminding workers of rules, of regulations, of contracts. But the stories could not be stopped. One human had acted when no one else would. That fact carried more weight than any warning. Velarix herself grew braver. She no longer whispered apologies to her children. She taught them to eat steadily, to grow strong, to believe that survival was possible. She moved through the station with a quiet dignity, her wings folded neatly, her tail held with purpose. She understood that change came slowly, and that the human who helped her risked much, but she also understood that sometimes courage was contagious. Aaron felt the pressure too. Some of the human staff watched him more closely now, skeptical, uneasy. They whispered about precedent, about danger, about rules broken in the name of morality. But he did not falter. He knew that inaction was a greater threat than attention. If he stepped away, Velarix and her children could suffer again. If he stood firm, the station might learn, slowly, that rules could serve life as well as order. Velarix noticed the changes. Other dragons began to approach her quietly, asking questions, learning small ways to survive. Some began reporting delays or hazards that had been ignored for cycles. Slowly, carefully, the station's culture began to shift. Survival was no longer only about hiding. It was about acting when needed, about noticing when a mother needed help, about small kindnesses that rippled outward. Aaron watched her from a distance, silently proud. One act of courage had become more than a gesture. It had become a signal, a quiet rebellion against indifference. The system might resist, but the station would never be the same. He understood that the real work was not only feeding the children, but showing the galaxy that humans could act when others would not. Velarix returned to her quarters at the end of the cycle, the hatchlings fed and safe. She paused at the threshold, looking out over the hallways. Other dragons glanced at her respectfully, some quietly smiling, some nodding. She did not know their names, did not know their stories, but she felt their recognition. She had survived. She had acted. And someone had stood with her. Aaron remained near, careful to avoid attention. He had not saved the system, nor changed the rules. But he had changed lives. He had proved that one human, quietly refusing to walk away, could create hope where there had been none. And hope, he knew, was more dangerous to a broken system than any law or regulation. The day ended quietly, with soft hums of machinery and gentle lights. Velarix tucked her hatchlings close, their small breath steady and calm. Aaron watched from the shadows, satisfied that today, survival had been stronger than fear. Tomorrow, the ripple would continue. And slowly, the station learned that kindness, even when it breaks no law, can feel like a threat to those who rely only on rules. The station was quiet in the early cycle, but it carried a new energy, subtle and alive. Velarix's hatchlings moved freely in their quarters, exploring their small space with wings flapping, tails swishing, eyes bright. They had food, warmth, and safety. For the first time in cycles, they felt secure. Velarix watched them, her chest swelling with pride and relief. She had survived. Her children had survived. And one human had made the difference. Aaron moved through the hallways quietly, observing without interrupting. He saw dragons pausing in their work, whispering in small groups, sharing knowledge that had been ignored for cycles. Some had received small aid now, quietly, through the emergency clause he had triggered. Others had begun asking questions about how the system worked. Velarix's courage, combined with his action, had created a ripple far beyond her small quarters. Station authorities remained uneasy. They held meetings, reviewed logs, and debated policies. Some humans were called to explain procedures. Officials feared that if the rules bent for one dragon, other species would demand the same, and eventually, the system's control could weaken. But the change had already begun. The galaxy was watching, and the story of the human who had refused to walk away spread quietly through networks, messages, and whispers. Velarix moved through the corridors with dignity now. Other dragons nodded respectfully, some even smiling subtly. They no longer hid exhaustion in shadows. They no longer believed they must suffer silently. Some asked her questions about how she had survived, how she had found help. Velarix could only tell them the truth. A human had acted when no one else would, and that action had saved her family. That was all she knew. Aaron continued monitoring the station, quietly assisting where he could. He did not take credit. He knew that recognition was not important. The real achievement was that life had been preserved, that hope had been restored, that a small act had shown others that the system could serve more than procedure. The ripple was spreading, slowly but surely, through the hearts of dragons and humans alike. Beyond the station, the story traveled. Other human officers in distant stations and colonies began to hear it. Whispers of Aaron's action, of Velarix's survival, inspired discussions, small at first, then louder. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy, practical, rule-bound, disciplined. But now, a new reputation began to form. Humans who acted with care, humans who refused to ignore suffering, humans who could bend systems without breaking law to help others survive. Velarix's hatchlings grew stronger. Each day, they tested their wings, explored their quarters, and learned the world slowly. Their mother watched over them, cautious yet proud. She spoke to them softly, telling them to be brave, to survive, to notice others who needed help. She explained, in her own way, that life was sometimes difficult, but kindness could make it possible. Aaron observed quietly, satisfied. He had acted once, but the result was far greater than he had imagined. One human's choice had shown the galaxy that survival was not just about following rules. It was about noticing those who could not defend themselves, about acting even when it was inconvenient, about refusing to walk away when someone needed help. Other dragons began to ask for help more openly, trusting that some humans might act. Some humans started to notice patterns of unfairness and began using legal tools to provide aid. Slowly, the culture of the stations began to shift. Survival was no longer silent. It was shared. It was observed. And it was strengthened by small, careful actions that did not break law but changed lives. Velarix watched her hatchlings play, their tails intertwining, wings brushing lightly against one another. They were not only safe, they were learning. They were learning that the galaxy could be kind, that some humans could be trusted, that help could come from unexpected places. She had never imagined it, yet now, it was real. Aaron continued his quiet work. He checked logs, ensured aid reached those in need, and quietly encouraged others to act when they could. His reputation grew slowly among those who observed him. He was no hero in the traditional sense. He did not fight wars, conquer territories, or command fleets. But he was noticed. And the galaxy noticed what humans could do when they refused to ignore suffering. Other species began to take note too. News of one human acting to feed a dragon mother's children reached the ears of diplomats, merchants, and station administrators. Some were skeptical at first. Some were curious. But all began to understand a simple truth: humans were not only efficient, they could be unexpectedly compassionate. They could act when others hesitated. They could bend a system to preserve life without breaking law. And that was a power far more influential than most realized. Velarix's hatchlings grew each cycle, stronger and more independent. Her family flourished. Her community began to change, slowly, quietly. Survival was no longer just endurance, it was hope, and it spread like a quiet flame. She often glanced at Eren as he passed by, and though she never needed to speak, her gratitude was clear. She would never forget that a human had stood for them, had refused to walk away, and had changed the course of their lives. The station continued its work, its halls alive with cargo and conversation. Rules still existed. Procedures still mattered. But the fear, the cold, the silence had shifted. One act of kindness had proved that life could matter more than process, that attention and action could ripple outward, changing hearts and habits alike. Eren walked through the corridors quietly, observing, smiling faintly at small gestures of survival, small acts of courage among dragons and humans alike. The ripple he had started continued to grow. He did not need recognition, for the results were clear. A dragon mother's children were fed, a community's hope had strengthened, and the galaxy had begun to notice what humans could do. In the quiet of the evening, Velarix watched her hatchlings sleep, curled together, safe and warm. She whispered softly, "We survived, because someone cared." And she knew that someone's courage had changed more than just her family. It had begun to change the galaxy itself. And in that moment, Eren understood what humans had always hoped to teach. Sometimes, survival is more than strength or rules. Sometimes, survival is compassion. Sometimes, survival is refusing to walk away. The galaxy learned something that day. Humans were not perfect, but they were capable of care, of courage, and of action that mattered. And for Velarix and her hatchlings, and for countless others who would hear the story in cycles to come, that lesson was life itself.